Hello and welcome to the Reasonably Good Life. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brooks, along with my trusty co-host and intern, Patrick Kennedy. How are you doing, Patrick?
Good, Dr. Brooks. How are you?
I'm getting over a cold. It's not COVID. I've tested. It's the original coronavirus, the OG coronavirus I got right here, and I'm which is still no fun, but I'm glad it's not COVID. But I'm in recovery, but I'm plugging along. I'm gonna just do this podcast, regardless whether it is a rough one or not. I might be a little hoarse, so if you detect that in my voice,
that's okay. We'll work with it.
Yeah, it's the coronavirus. All right. So we've been talking about suffering a lot. And we'll do a brief recap for you listener out there who's been following all of. I have a feeling I know the main listener is my good friend Tom Gehring, who I will have on the show sometime. He's a longtime friend, also a UT alumnus. And he was my roommate in college. And so thanks, Tom, for listening. And you're the one. Hopefully we get more here along the way. So we've been talking about suffering, level 1 suffering, level 2 suffering. So the level 1 suffering is the suffering that is just part of the human experience of physical injury and loss and, not getting our needs met. And so there's part of suffering in life that is inescapable. And I was using that quote, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So that pain, level 1 suffering, is that the pain part that's inescapable, part of the human condition. The level 2 suffering is the suffering we get from the woulda, coulda, shouldas, what ifs, imagining social comparison. There are all these different ways that we're in our heads, and we got this mind chatter going that causes us this unnecessary suffering. And we can do a lot about this level 2 suffering, this day-to-day suffering, that in the Western world, we're suffering more of level 2 suffering than level 1 suffering, because we're getting most of our needs met. Although we do encounter level 1 suffering, and it can be quite painful, but the day-to-day insidious problem is the level 2 suffering. And then we talked about attachment and suffering last time, and it was kind of pulling in on Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, how attachments can be the root of suffering. Because as we attach to something, a team, an idea, a value, people, girlfriend or whatever, we can become overly attached. So there's a healthy part of attachment that we need, right? Of being an infant attached to his mother and, vice versa, all that. Lots of healthy attachments. But when we become overly attached, we become vulnerable, because when those attachments go wrong, we're like a yo-yo. We go up and down with whatever we're attached to. We're kind of fused to it. And that's the part's kind of the danger zone. And some of this you may have encountered. I don't know. How much of this have you encountered before, Patrick?
How much have I personally encountered?
Well, not. I mean, you've encountered level 1 and level 2 suffering. If you're human,
you're talking about the theory.
You are human, correct?
Yeah.
So you've encountered both, but like,
most would say so.
Yeah, these ideas, like,
yes, these ideas I have encountered. I'm learning a little bit. So at UT, I'm taking a class about psychopathology, and we're talking about the distinction between just basic fear versus anxiety. And it kind of fits into this idea of level 1 suffering versus level 2 suffering. That
okay,
fear
gotcha.
is like a very primal, like instinctual kind of suffering that we can't really avoid. It's like a physiological response. Whereas
Yes.
anxiety is like, it's kind of future oriented. It's this like
Yeah.
anticipatory worry that we have.
Yes. Yeah. And that gets us into all sorts of trouble. And, I talked about the great irony of suffering is that we suffer a lot in life from worrying that we might suffer. So if we're at time one and then we're worrying about something happening at time two, this time two thing that we're worried about, even if the bad thing happens, it's probably not near as bad as we fear. But because we start suffering just by thinking about it, we suffer all the way up to the event. And then usually it's not near as bad as we think. And I had some quotes about that. Any rate, I welcome you listeners to listen to the previous podcast to cover this, because it's really important, because we're trying to be happy in life, right?
Absolutely.
And suffering gets in the way of happiness, unless you're a masochist, in which case you're perfectly happy suffering. Unless someone denies you suffering, then you're suffering because you're not suffering, something like that.
So we worry about our worrying.
Yes, we
And
worry.
that just creates more suffering.
Yeah. The anticipatory, nature of, we worry that we might suffer, which causes us to suffer in the here and now, even if that thing that we're worried about, it may not even happen. It may be like the boogeyman under our bed. We're worried about, I'll give you one. And I use this in a blog for Psychology Today. Did you ever watch Jaws, the movie? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
How old were you when you watched Jaws?
Probably 10 years old.
Okay. Did that make you, when you went to the beach after that, like, were there times when it's the single,
Absolutely.
I mean, I was afraid. I had real fear in me, even in a swimming pool at night. I mean, as a kid.
Absolutely.
Even in lakes, I'm worried about shark. I mean, not as much now, but certainly as a kid, and certainly when I'd go to Galveston, when I was a kid, I grew up in Houston. We'd go to the beach, and I'd hear that John Williams music, that and my legs are dangling, and I'm envisioning, like something just chomping down. And it's like, there's no great whites in Galveston.
Yeah,
And they're very, very,
I don't think people would be afraid of sharks at all if it wasn't because of Jaws, and then because of everything that.
Oh my God, the fears went. Yeah, it was just, but it's like being afraid of being attacked by a shark in a lake. I mean, it's like, come on, a swimming pool. I mean, but the fear is real. So it's like this imagination, causes us a lot of suffering in life, and it gets away. Our minds have a mind of their own often, and cling to they start generating these images and ideas that, work up,
seemingly out of our control.
Yeah, seemingly. And we'll cover this in future podcasts. With practice, we can gain more control. So our minds, like Buddhists call it the monkey mind. It's like some crazy monkey jumping from limb to limb. It's like had Adderall or whatever. it's had
all over the place.
Triple espresso monkey mind jumping from limb to limb. So now the ego. We're going to talk about the ego today. Now, Freud did all his stuff with the ego, but I'm not talking about ego like we're full of ourselves, like he has a big ego. I mean, that's kind of a certain subset. Ego in a general sense is, well, what do you think of, Patrick, when you say ego?
When I think of ego, I think of somebody saying like, oh, that guy has a big ego.
Yeah.
Like they're full of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how it's used kind of in the vernacular. The ego I'm talking about is our sense of self. So we have these ideas about who we are. And, it starts from early on. We get a name and we learn our name. It's like, I am Mike, that's who I am, and then you have like possessions, toys, things like that that's mine. Someone takes a toy away from a child, they start crying, why? Well, they're attached to it, they have this sense of possession, but it's like it becomes almost part of who we are. And that's that ego, the stories we tell ourselves, the self-referential I. So anytime we need an ego, we need a sense of separateness from other people to meet our needs for food. I am hungry. I am thirsty. It's like to give our sense of agency to move about the world. We have to have a sense of I. So it's not an inherently bad thing, just like attachments aren't inherently bad, right? We can have very healthy attachments, and we need attachments, to function in this world. We're social creatures, and we covered that in the other episode. So we need a sense of self, right? We need an I.
Right.
But how it gets us in trouble is we become fused with these ideas, these thoughts. We overly identified with, I touched on this last time, but it's like, okay, you go to UT, I went to UT. It's like, I am a Longhorn. So if someone makes fun from OU or A&M or wherever, and they make fun of UT, and this isn't just UT, if a UT person makes fun, a Longhorn makes fun of A&M or OU, people get really upset, if you start dissing their alma mater, or
because it's part of their identity, right?
Part of their identity. If a foreigner from a different country you're visiting and they start dissing America, saying America sucks or whatever, Republicans, dissing Democrat, just criticize, it goes each way. This is a human thing. It's not a right or left, but we get identified to our party. We get identified to our ideals. The flag, someone burns the flag. Whoa, it's like, oh my God, that's just like abhorrent to some people. And, I get it. It's a attachment, freedom, if someone takes away your liberty, but even the idea that someone might take away your liberty can cause someone to get really upset. So our ego gets us, can be a form of attachment that gets us into a lot of trouble, because we feel a need to defend things we become attached to. Whatever our ego attaches to, if it gets threatened, it activates the same fight, flight, or freeze mechanism that is embedded within us for physical survival.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So we tend to attach to many different things and make it part of our identity, like groups, like ideas, values, even feelings.
Yep. Yes, feelings.
So we're part of a group, and that group seems to be getting attacked. It feels like an attack on us.
Yes, exactly. And we can get attached to our stories, like of who I am, of being a victim. And if someone tries to take away my story, or I'm the person in charge and someone questions my authority, I'm attached to my identity as the top dog. And so if they question me, or, feel like they have embarrassed me or something in front of people, then I feel a need to defend myself, to go on the attack. And we've all done this, I do it too. And still, it's like, even the awareness, I'll have times where, and if you've ever, in a political argument or about gun rights, or, abortion, or, whatever it is, the flag burning, it can be all these different things. And if you have an opinion, an idea, and someone questions it or attacks it, you feel, even like your favorite movie, your favorite song, your favorite music artist. If you say, and you've probably been in where you say you love some artist and someone says, God, I hate, whatever. And you're like, ugh. I remember, I'm just sharing here. I remember, this is so stupid, like in a way, but I remember when I was in college and I was on like a first date with a girl from one of my classes, and she
Okay.
came over to my place and she saw the Lord of the Rings on my bookshelf, and she was like, "Oh, I read that book," and she was pointing to The Hobbit. And I was like, oh, I just sort of gotten to know her, we were about to head out to dinner or something. And she goes, I read that book. And I was like, oh man, she's like really cool.
No
And
way.
then she goes, that was the stupidest book I ever read.
Oh
And
no.
I was like, oh my God, she might as
The
well punch.
pain.
She might as well need me in the nards. I was so like, I was viscerally, I was so upset. I pretty much ended the date and I was done. And I was like, I know I'm not proud to say that, listeners, but I'm just like, call it for what it is. I got to make fun of myself. It's like I have some, things I'm not proud of in my past, and that'd be one. But
The deal breaker.
I was so attached, my identity and what that meant to me. It was just a book she didn't like. So what, but it was like she just spat on me, is how I felt. It was like it was insulted. And it was like, why, and you think about why was that, well, I had this sense of self. I had an identity, an ego that incorporated Lord of the Rings into it. That was, my favorite series. And she basically, she didn't like it. So it was like saying, you don't like me. You don't like an important part of me. So by her attacking that one thing, it felt like I was being attacked.
Absolutely.
And we've all had those experiences before. And, the flip side is, if we step back and think about it, if everybody can kind of identify those times where their ego identifies, all those times when you get upset and the politics and, people get so incensed, so upset. When you attack a political candidate that if you're into Donald Trump and you love Donald Trump and someone says, that guy is such an idiot, Trump, it's like they're insulting you because, same with Biden or Hillary Clinton. Again, this isn't right or left thing. It's a right and left thing. It's a human thing to identify. So I definitely don't want to get political in the sense of favoring right or left. We can all do it because we bring our human nature with us wherever we go. We can't escape our human nature. And part of our human nature is we want to identify with things. And I think that helps us get a coherent sense of self, to say, this is what I'm about. This is who I am. These are my values, and don't tread on me, don't tread on those values and stuff. So the trouble is it makes us very vulnerable in life when we become overly attached to these things, because then we feel the need to, it activates that fight, flight, or freeze. We feel a need to go on the attack or the defense or something. And so then as we go about our day, anytime we see something that like attacks us, and right now the right and left keep attacking each other, making fun of each other. And so it just gets people all pissed off, and you're identified with your group, your tribe versus the other tribe. This is my group, in group, out group, out group, us versus them. And that mentality can cause us a lot of suffering as we go about life. That all makes sense?
That makes sense. So we
with me?
identify with our groups, and if somebody attacks those groups, it's an attack toward us, at least we think. And sometimes that can cause us to suffer maybe a little bit more than it should.
Yes, more than it should. So that's kind of, to me, the key is, it's not to not have groups or not have a sports team that you like or any of that. Sure, we have attachments to our partners, our family, our sports team, our coffee cup or whatever it is, and that can be okay. It's just when we become overly attached, then we end up a bit of a leaf in the wind. When the wind's blowing right, we'll feel pretty good. But then if we feel like our team's being attacked or criticized, or some idea or value, or we lose a possession that's has some sentimental value, we feel like we've lost part of ourselves. And it's like, ooh, that is the part where we have to work. That goes back to the Buddhism of like where non-attachment, or at least not overly attached. We got to strive for that in life. And we can just sort of look at how we go about our day and see what pisses us off sometimes, to see where our attachments are, what bends us out of shape, what kind of insult or things, do you have this visceral, you can feel it, like,
right. So it helps to evaluate what we're attached to. And I mean, I don't think it would be fair to deny ourselves the right to identify with something, whether it's a political party or a value or an idea. Like you're saying, it's a very human thing. I don't even think it would be fair or healthy to deny ourselves the right to have those kinds of parts of our identity. But it seems like the idea here is that during those times where it's causing that really visceral reaction and causing us pain and suffering, it might be helpful to think about how sometimes we overly identify with things.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That can be a cue, is to say, I wonder if my ego was involved here. I wonder if some kind of attachment I have, that I've got too much psychological investment in this thing. And we talked about before how flexibility is a key to happiness in life. A purpose of life is that, we have to be able to pivot in life depending on what life throws at us. But when we become overly attached, we are less flexible. So it's kind of the antithesis of flexibility is attachment and over attachment. We need some attachment for being kind of grounded, I guess. But then if it's overly so, then we cease to be flexible, and we're going to be subject to, if this thing gets attacked or jeopardized in some way, then I'm going to go down the tubes with it, and I see like polarization is people becoming overly attached and inflexible, overly identified with their parties, they're too much ego investment, and then they become less flexible to compromise, right? Our politics now is like, there's hardly any compromise in Congress, to people. It's like, I'm right, you're wrong. Now my identity, I am right. Okay, that's like saying I am Mike. My sense of self is identified with right. I've identified myself a mental position of correctness with some type of belief. I'm right about whatever, immigration. And then you are wrong. Now your identity is like jeopardized because, you're bad, basically, I'm good.
So
you're bad.
we're so set, at least in terms of politics and polarization. When it comes to partisanship, we're so set on this identity of I'm right, you're wrong, that we're unable to be flexible enough to really weigh out the arguments that we hear from the other side.
Exactly. We're not even listening to each other. We're just like devolved into name calling and such. Now, here's the thing, though. If we really think about it and we say, okay, I get we have, an ego, and yes, I, love my sports team or my political party or my cause or my whatever it is. Yes, yes, yes. But if we step back and say, okay, wait, all right, well, who am I really? Like, listeners out there, like, think, who are you? If you had to say who you are to someone, what would you say? And now you think about that, and it's like, well, I might say, well, who am I? Well, I grew up in Houston, and then I went to UT, and now I'm telling about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling who I am. I'm telling about myself. I grew up here. I'm this old. I'm male, identify as male, all that identity, right? Um, Say I went to graduate school. I am a psychologist. Oh, now, here's another part of I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I live in Southwest Austin. I'm a Texan. I'm an Austinite, a Longhorn.
Mm.
I name all these things. I have written a book. I've done this. Now, see, I can tell a lot of things I've done, but what I've done is not who I am. What
Right.
I've done is in the past, you know.
Those are things you've identified with. You've adopted those things into your
Right,
identity.
I've adopted them, but if we step back and think of it, that can't be who I am, because those are temporal. Like, we are ever changing,
Mm.
who we are, right? We physically grow, our hair change, our skin change. I mean, our skin cells are replacing like every day, our blood cells, it's really odd when you think about it. And there's some websites that talk about this, like our brains constantly change. We still have the same neurons, like those don't die and get replaced like our other cells, but we're constantly learning, right? Our brains are never the same. Like, your brain is not the exact same in this moment as it was 5 minutes ago, as it was, a month ago, a year ago, 10 years, constant change. So it's like,
it's not even like hardware or like software. It's like this, it's like a design that is constantly evolving second by
right.
second. And there's neurons being, there's the term pruning. So like
Yes.
some are being removed, others are being created in terms of connections.
Right.
So
Right.
it's hard to say who we really are if that is constantly changing.
Exactly. That's kind of the crux of kind of more of a Buddhist, or where we can loosen the attachment, is by realizing our true nature is ever evolving. Like, we could also think of things we used to believe, used to be fans of, used to be into, and those changed. Where we lived changes, all these different, who we date can change. So all these things about us are changing. And here's the weird part. And we're still the same I'm still inside my head, and you're still inside. My consciousness is still inside this body,
Mm.
and your consciousness is still inside your body. What doesn't change is your consciousness will never be in my body, and my consciousness will never be in your body. That is a constant. However, within these bodies, we're constantly changing.
Mm.
So there's this both and quality of, we are always who we are, and we're never the same as who we were. We're constant. So there's that Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher. The quote is, and I hope I don't mangle it, but a man doesn't step in the same river, never can step in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man.
Mm.
Right.
It's kind of
Now,
like that story of the ship that if some of its parts
oh
become
yeah.
become moldy
Oh,
and rotten, and you
yes.
start to replace it with more and more parts. At
Right.
what point is it the same ship?
Yes, exactly. That's one of those like crazy ones. I forget who did that, but it really makes you think of, who are we if we're constantly changing? And here's the part where there's a freedom from the identification and the ego. If we say, who am I, is I am my conscious presence.
Hmm.
And that's all I am, my conscious presence. And that gets into the mindfulness of being, be here now. Is we only live in the moment we're in. which is the now. So oddly, the now is eternal because there is no future and there's no past. There's only the eternal now that we're living in. And that now is very spacious if we allow it to be. When I'm just sitting here talking to you, and, listener, as you're driving or whatever you're doing, is to think, I'm just sitting in a chair. In this moment, I'm kind of not a husband, a dad, a longhorn, or any of those things, a writer. I'm not writing, an author. There's no book. There's just me talking to you. That's all there is. And as I'm conscious of this, and being really connected to this moment now, I am free of the ego and all the attachments that make me vulnerable to much suffering.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
If we accept that, like if I accept that I am my consciousness, then I'm able to free myself from the attachments that may
Right.
be leading to some suffering.
Right. It makes us very flexible and spacious to just, instead of saying I am a longhorn or I am a dad or whatever, just say I am.
Hmm.
And just leave it there and just let it hang. I am. And just feel that spaciousness. And when we can do that and loosen the grip of the ego and the attachments, it can free us of a lot of unnecessary suffering that comes from these egoic identifications and attachments that make us vulnerable when when those get, questioned or attacked or whatever. So again, doesn't mean don't have attachments, doesn't mean we can't say I'm a fan of this or, I believe in that. It's just it's like one of those principles of life is just sort of like balance, Want to have attachment? Sure. Not too much. It's kind of the Goldilocks, we want to have that middle, but finding some wiggle room, some spaciousness, some distance from it, so we're not clinging to them, gives us a freedom that we otherwise won't experience. And so to me, it's something I strive for. And that the emotions that kick up day to day when something irks me and I have that reaction is, listeners, just be on the alert for those, notice those and say, I wonder what that was about. I wonder if I'm a little overly attached. What am I defending exactly when I get defensive? What's at stake? And usually it's some kind of attachment that we've got that we're defending. And it's like, does it really need defending? If I'm a Longhorn fan and someone attacks the football team and says, they suck or whatever, does the Longhorn football team really need me to defend them? They're a bunch of big burly guys, they don't need me to defend. What is that? It's like, hey, you like your football team, I like mine. And guess what? If I went to A&M, had gone to A&M, I would be an Aggie and I would be a fan of A&M, and that could be another conversation of kind of our sense of self and trying to loosen the grip of the ego, is trying to understand how we are who we are through no credit of ourselves. Nothing I did made me conscious in the body that I'm in. That makes sense.
So our consciousness isn't linked to anything that happens. It's the only constant that we have.
Yeah. I mean, it's not through any effort of our own that we're in the bodies that we're in, and you're inside your head and I'm inside mine. I did nothing to deserve it, to earn it. I didn't work for it,
Okay.
And trying to understand that can help us loosen the separation or weaken the separation between me and you. When I realize that my sense of self is actually a happenstance, a weird, it's kind of a lottery or something that I even exist and am having this conversation with you, and to realize that our separateness is not through anything I have done. And from some weird cosmic miracle or fluke, I am me and not you, or some medieval peasant that existed during the bubonic plague. It's like, I didn't do any of that. I'm just a guy here, and trying to, I don't know if this makes sense, but we'll go into it more. But that separateness of I and you can also cause a lot of friction, the separateness. And so by having a more flexible sense of self, then I can empathize and see from your perspective much easier if I'm flexible and not attached to my ego and all the trappings of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so some of this is, I don't know if you've heard of Eckhart Tolle. Have you read it? Okay. He's he gets a little out there, but he takes a lot of Buddhist kind of teachings and teaches it to a Western audience. And, I've read a whole bunch of books, Buddhism and stuff. And some of this stuff, like, I didn't make this up. This is stuff I've been taught from other sources. So no credit to me, because that would be my ego for people to say, oh, look, I'm smart. Look, I have knowledge, and, look at me, all that ego, it's like, if people don't like this, it's okay. I'm not going to take it personally. That would be my ego. It's like, hey, there's different, whatever floats your boat is fine. If you find this useful, great. If not, that's okay. There's other material I'm going to cover later on, but, just give you some food for thought. And I hope some listeners out there got some nuggets from this conversation, and can maybe start to put it to use. And we can put some stuff in the posts about like resources and links and stuff like that, if people want to find out more about this stuff.
Sure. That sounds
all
good.
right. Okay, well, that concludes episode 11 of The Reasonably Good Life. I've been your host, Dr. Mike Brooks, along with Patrick Kennedy. And yes, hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you follow up with us for future podcasts. We'll be covering more territory related. Hopefully, we're going to be doing some interviews and stuff in future podcasts. But be curious, be flexible, be kind, and for goodness sakes, be reasonable. Thanks a lot.